Asyle, Tropical Island Survival. Week 29, Day 1. I've now been on the island for 7 months. I'm half expecting the smugglers to show up any minute now that I'm ready for them, but I saw nothing on the horizon this morning. There was nothing else I could do for my nervousness but to start my maintenance rounds on the base, so as I started my morning chores, I checked on the trot lines, tide pool, chicken houses, garden, orchard, and gates. The trot line mechanism seemed to be fine, even though I haven't been using it as much as I used to. It reminded me that I needed to start collecting ink for my typewriter again, and I briefly considered coming up with a way to make the trot line mechanism automatically collect my octopus pots. But I felt like the octopi would catch on and evacuate before the pots could be collected. One of the chicken houses had also been knocked over a bit, so I spent a little extra time getting it upright and finding some sticks to repair it as I went about my foraging. I've been getting a little extra time for that each day anyway, because I'm running out of space to store stuff like latex and resin. I've got so much now, however, that I don't think I'm reasonably going to be able to use it all before it goes bad, so I can afford to gather more slowly and give the trees a little more time to heal. I also checked on the catamaran while I was out in that neck of the woods. I thought to myself that I really needed to at least try to get it back into shipshape, now that I have better tools, sail materials, and knowledge, before it starts to rot or something. I should at least try to face my fears again, if for no other reason than to sail around the island every now and then for fun. Even as that thought crossed my mind, though, the idea of being untethered from the island sends a cold shudder through me, and although I'm technically untethered when I'm using the kayak, I stay so close to the shore that it never seems to matter, never so far away that I can actually see the island from end to end. I haven't even gone into the beach hut much the past few weeks, and I almost feel bad about it, since it was such a nice little home for me during my first few months on the island. It didn't appear to need any work, but it did get me thinking that I should make sure my base is prepared for the wet season, beginning with some meteorological and record-keeping equipment, and making sure that anything wooden and exposed to the weather was varnished or rubberized to keep it from rotting. As for my meteorological equipment, that was pretty easy to whip up, starting by preparing a rubber hose, which I filled with water, mounted on the wall in a U shape, and sealed on one end. That end should now forever be set at the current atmospheric pressure, leaving the water on the other end to rise and fall as the atmospheric pressure around it changes, acting as a barometer. I put a short, hollow length of bamboo on the open end, and left a stick floating on the water to bob up and down next to some marks, so the pressure would be easier to measure in more exact terms. And by connecting this bobber to a stick on a pivot, I got even more precise pressure readings, as the lever arm of this dial exaggerated the motions of this bobber along an arc. While I was at it, I made a similar mechanism with just a hollowed out piece of bamboo with a bobber and indicator on it to measure relative amounts of rainfall. I know there are also ways to measure the humidity, but I don't really care about that because I know it's never going to stop being too humid here for me. I mounted the meters outside my office, where they'd be easy to check on a rainy day, and I was able to easily measure wind speed and direction using the wind turbine on top of the house. Finally, I drew some spreadsheets and grids in one of my empty books, so I could keep track of the weather and see changes in it over long periods of time. I at least knew that if the pressure dropped significantly below normal, there would be a storm, as hot, dry air rises and cold, moist air slides in to take its place. The only other tool I needed was a thermometer, but I still wasn't sure how to make a very sensitive one using the materials I had access to. I'll attend to that later. For the time being, I moved on and checked on the workshop. It was mostly the lathe that had been used this month, on top of the electrolysis tub. But now that I was done making the gun barrel, I was reminded that I needed to coat it in something less reactive than limestone. So I pulled it out of the shop, emptied it, and lined the inside with clay before leaving it out to dry in the sun. I'll light a fire inside the tub to hopefully fire the clay lining later. In the meantime, I worked on tuning up the lathe and replacing a few bearings around the workshop. I then checked on the bathhouse, and aside from a little cleaning, there wasn't a lot that needed to be done there. I took note of how the scissor gates would need to be varnished, but it also occurred to me that my lovely curtains may become damp from the rain and eventually rot, so I had the idea to mount some rubberized fabric to the scissor gates to keep the interior of the bathhouse protected. That'll require me to make some more cloth, though. I'll start working on that later. For now, though, I see that I'm finally running out of soap, shampoo, and toothpaste, so I'll take some time to mix up some more in the kitchen. While I was in the kitchen, I checked on the refrigeration system and noted that there appeared to be a slow leak somewhere. I took a moment to refill it with ethanol and look for leaks, even though I couldn't find any. The ethanol is probably evaporating before I can leave a mark. I think I'll just have to accept this as part of regular maintenance here. This also got me thinking about the fact that the refrigeration system won't work in the rainy season when there's no sun to heat it, so I needed to make a way to safely mount it in the kitchen kiln. The simplest solution would have been to lay it face down on the cooking surface, but I thought that would get in the way, so I took some time to build a new door for the kiln that I could mount the adsorption unit onto easily, exposing it to fire without it getting in the way. It also made for a handy protective cover for the adsorption unit when outside. While I was there, I also remembered that I wanted to make more bottles for soda making. I stopped for lunch before checking on the lab, and it was primarily the explosives rig that had been doing the most work in there this past month. Random bursts had certainly worn out several parts of the machine, so I took some time performing a little preventative maintenance, replacing bent or splintered wooden members and making a few spare clay lids and reaction vessels to replace any that were chipped or cracked. The only other thing I could see that needed doing in there was to tidy up a bit and grease the wind turbine and Van de Graaff generators, which hadn't been doing a lot of work since I stopped making nitric acid. I checked on the oxygen bubbler too, but I couldn't really tell if the potash I put in it had turned to potassium peroxide, at least just by looking at it. Pouring a little bit of water and holding a burning stick next to it, however, confirmed that the bubbles produced by that reaction did indeed contain oxygen, as the stick started burning more vigorously. I have successfully found a way to store oxygen in a solid form. This got me thinking a little bit about how to store hydrogen from electrolysis the same way. The easiest way would probably be to store it as methane, but that would require exposing the hydrogen to carbon, probably under great heat and pressure. It might make a nice fuel source in the winter, if I could find a way to safely store it, but that's a project for another day. I checked on the solar tower, and while it has seen a lot of action this month, I noticed that it hadn't actually been making a lot of water, since I'd been using it so much for metallurgical projects. As a result, the water levels in the cistern were getting low. Good thing I stockpiled beforehand, otherwise the gardens might have ended up running out of water. For the time being, however, I made a mental note that I needed to leave the water levels to recharge. The elevator certainly needed some grease, and I checked the ropes and pulleys to make sure that nothing was fraying or splintering. I checked and adjusted the panels, replacing any cords or wooden members that appeared to be wearing out, and had the idea to add some slack backup cords wherever a cord was in use, so that if one failed while I was too far away to do anything about it, the whole panel wouldn't come crashing to the ground and shatter into 1,000 pieces. Finally, I checked on the house, but because there was so little active equipment in there wasn't a lot that actually needed maintenance. I just took out the toilet pot and did some tidying. Keeping my living space clean does help me keep calmer. My gramophone records were starting to fill up, so I heated them a bit in the solar kiln to soften the rosin on their surfaces, effectively wiping the information from them so they were ready for a new round of recordings. I found at the end of the day that this maintenance run had helped me calm down a bit, and distracted me from thinking about how the smugglers were probably on their way. I had a nice to-do list for the coming week, even though I fully expected to be interrupted, and I felt better than when I got up this morning. So I spent the last hour of the evening relaxing and watching the sunset before getting ready for bed. Week 29, Day 2. After checking the horizon again and doing my morning chores, I started a fire in the electrolysis tub, adding the other clay items I left out in the sun yesterday to it, covering it up to keep the heat in, and leaving it to burn over the course of the day. Next, I ground down some of my cellulose scraps from all the woodwork I'd been doing, and left them to soak in alkali for a couple of hours to get them nice and soft, because the loom has been kind of fragile lately. In the meantime, I started varnishing as many wooden objects as I could, starting with the trot line mechanism, the saltwater turbines, and the beach hut. I stopped for lunch at that point before going around the base and varnishing all the doors and shutters. It occurred to me, though, as I started doing this, that I was also making these items more flammable, which would be a big hazard if I came under attack. This got me thinking about building a smoke detection and fire suppression system for my buildings. Maybe it's a bit overboard, but I wrote it down for later. All that time spent varnishing, however, had been tedious enough to let my mind wander onto other things, namely that I was starting to feel really lonely here again. I should probably get the transmitter up and running again, as I've held the battery back for my acoustic array. The thought makes me a little nervous, however. Even though I know correlation is not causation, I can tell that my brain feels almost as though the act of calling for help was what brought the smugglers here to attack my base in the first place. I know that's not the case, but at the same time, I don't have enough evidence to be sure, so it keeps niggling at the back of my mind. In any case, I got the beach hut, workshop, and lab fully varnished before the end of the day, when I removed the clay parts from the electrolysis tub, cleaned it out, and brought it back into the workshop. Then I finished spinning the cellulose goo I prepared this morning, and loaded the loom to run overnight. Before the sun went down, though, I loaded and placed my octopus pots for collection in the morning. Week 29, Day 3. The longer the week goes on, the harder I'm finding it to sleep, anticipating the smugglers coming back. Every little noise wakes me up. After checking the horizon in the morning, I started on my morning chores, heading out in the kayak, catching 2 octopi, which I scared the ink out of before setting free again. I checked on the loom and found it had jammed again, making only a couple of square meters of cloth. It was a start, though, so I cleared the jam, set it running again, and started another batch of cellulose to grind and dissolve. I also cut, hemmed, and soaked the cloth I had in latex and left it out to dry. While I was in the workshop, I also refilled and reset the electrolysis rig to start making more iron plates, though I'll probably need more iron ore soon. I then mixed up another batch of varnish and got back to weatherproofing the base. I varnished the doors and shutters of the house before it was time for lunch, after which I moved on to the solar tower. There were a lot of parts of it that I actually couldn't varnish, because the kiln was too hot and it might cause those pieces to catch fire. The rest, like the support posts, panel frames, safety rails, etc., were fair game, though I had to lower the panels individually in order to reach the frames to varnish them. This took me most of the afternoon, and I frankly decided to stop early and attend to the loom. Fortunately, it hadn't jammed a second time, and I unloaded that round of cloth before spinning and loading the next round of thread. I cut, hemmed, and rubber-coated that round of curtains for the bathhouse too, but I had trouble staying awake long enough to finish and get ready for bed. Week 29, Day 4. I was awakened early in the morning by the buzzing sound of a boat motor out in front of the base. The smugglers must have decided to pay me a visit before dropping off their merchandise this time. I once again stumbled out of bed and into the panic room, but although I was still scared and nervous, there was also a strange sense of relief that I didn't have to feel tense waiting for them anymore. I raised the periscope and had a look. It was too early to use the solar dazzler, but they were pretty much as blind as I was in the dark anyway. I kept my fingers near the battery terminal of the acoustic array. After the boat motor stopped, I watched the path until I could barely make out figures in the darkness. I immediately turned on the acoustic array, and they stopped dead in their tracks, confused at first, and then holding their ears before beating a lazy retreat back towards the beach. I'm kind of ecstatic. I wasn't sure that was going to work. They tried a couple more times to come up the path, almost like they were probing to find out what was setting off the noise, and it kind of amused me that I had them so confused. They called out again in another language, but although I still felt tugged, my heart was hardened to them a bit, and it didn't affect me as badly as last time. At one point, they walked up the path and into the compound with their hands over their ears, like I wanted, but they didn't stay for too long. Just long enough to poke around a bit, and I followed them with the noise until they went back the way they came, and I heard the boat leave. I breathed a big sigh of relief and started laughing, a little at first, before devolving into hysterics. However, I soon had to stifle it as I lowered the periscope again to watch them unload once more at the bunker. They left as the sun started coming up, and I watched them through my telescope until I was sure they were gone. I then inspected all the places they'd been to get any information I could. They didn't leave a lot of clues on the path, but when I went to check out the bunker, I found they'd left a note behind, using my peace symbols as a paperweight, so they definitely saw them. Unfortunately, it was in a language I couldn't understand. I thought about taking it with me as a sign that I was there and that I'd gotten their message, but since I didn't know what the message said, they might end up inferring that I read and understood it, which could lead to unpredictable behavior, so I left it alone and basically got on with my day, tired but feeling much lighter. I foraged on my way back to the base before getting on with the rest of my morning chores. I put the solar dazzler mirrors in standby position, just in case, before continuing my work from yesterday, unloading and rubberizing my curtains from the loom and getting another batch of cellulose going. I checked on the electrolysis rig while I was in the workshop too, and unloaded the iron plates that were there, but there hadn't been a lot of growth on them because I'd pretty much run out of ore. I'm gonna have to start mining again. I still had a little more varnishing to do, so I mixed up a batch and started working on the garden fence and gates, now much more relaxed. I stopped for lunch before finishing the job. I had a little extra time to kill and was about to start experimenting with some ideas for a fire-retardant paint or spackle for my buildings, on top of the waterproofing I'd already been doing, when I heard the sound of a boat motor again. I checked the horizon with my telescope and saw another boat approaching the island, apparently at full speed, probably the pickup team for the smugglers, but I wasn't expecting them to come so soon, let alone during the day. Strangely, My first thought was that this was an excellent opportunity to test out the solar dazzler, so I quickly locked everything back up, set the mirrors in place, and waited in my panic room. As they approached, I thought about the fact that these guys would at least know for certain that I was here, because they were the ones who wrecked everything last time, and would see it had been fixed and reinforced. Or maybe they didn't, because again, the moment they stepped onto the path, I turned the dazzler and acoustic array on them, and they stumbled back. I could hear them call out in English again for me to stop. That they were my friends. But my heart was hardened. I knew better, and instead of breaking down, I just started feeling mad. They pulled out their guns and tried to shoot the source of light in the boys, each shot sending a jolt of panic through my body like electricity. But as predicted, they couldn't shoot what they couldn't see, let alone while covering their ears, so they left. I watched them load up the goods again through my periscope, and I watched them leave, though this time I noticed that they lingered for a while, probably to see if I would come out. Once I was confident that they'd left, I came out and checked the bunker again, this time finding a letter in English. It basically said, "We know you're here. We'll be back. We're willing to help you, but leave our stash alone. Do not attempt to leave or transmit a radio message, or else." Before, I was simply irritated but stuffing it. Now I was absolutely irate. They clearly know I'm a castaway, and they clearly don't want to rescue me. I almost respect that as part of the rules of the game. But to tell me not to try to escape or call for help? How dare they? Am I supposed to just stay here and be their prisoner? I decided to leave the message as I found it, again, to leave no indication that I was here or know what they know. The less they know about me, the greater my tactical advantage, even to the point of making them think I'm not even coming to the bunker to mess with them. However, I made up my mind that tomorrow I'll come back and take the radio antenna from the bunker back to my base and start transmitting immediately. My best chance to survive now is to get out of here. At the same time, though, I just stormed back to my base in a huff and got the next round of curtains ready before pacing around and arguing in my head until I cooled off enough to get ready for bed. I still kept an ear out in case they decided to double back or something. Week 29, Day 5. I felt a bit more level-headed after a good night's sleep. Nevertheless, while I was out foraging during my morning chores, I decided to stop at the bunker and see what I could do to start dismantling the radio tower. It was certainly beefier and more simplistic than modern hobby antennas, little more than a steel tube with some tripods to hold it up, but that was something I always appreciated about older technology. As such, while I was initially afraid that I would have to float it around the island on my boat, if it was anchored with concrete or something, in this case it took little effort at all to pull the anchors out of the ground and dismantle it, though the rust around the joints needed to be beaten apart for me to do this. The weather here obviously hasn't been kind to it, but it also made my job that much easier. I then carried it back to base in pieces, along with my fruit for the day, and spent some time reassembling it. Next to the house seemed the most appropriate place, where I could keep it and the transmitting equipment safest. I made some bamboo cord for guide wires, and it soon looked like a proper radio station. Instead of moving the battery back upstairs, I decided to just run some wire down through the periscope, so I could switch between the transmitter and the acoustic array at a moment's notice, though this used up the last of my spare wire. Finally, I started the transmitter up again. I won't have to worry about rebuilding it this time. By that time, the curtains for the bathhouse had finished rubberizing, so I spent some time installing them before taking an early lunch break. I felt like I could finally relax a little, and it was good to just lean back and close my eyes. My mind didn't rest for long, however, as I thought it would be lovely to have lunch in the garden, and as a way to celebrate the successful defense of my base, I had an idea to build a little pagoda at the crossroad between the garden terraces. I began building a bamboo trellis with 4 entrances. Because it didn't need to be particularly strong or waterproof, it was relatively quick and easy to build, though I still tried to make it as artfully as I could. Once again, I made the roof to be somewhat arched, and with half arches sticking out of it for plants to grow on and extend their growing surface / my shading surface as they grew. I then built a couple of chairs and a circular table to sit in the center, as though it was intended for having afternoon tea or something. It's silly that I'm making all these chairs that I'm never going to use, or that other people will probably never sit in, but for some reason, again, it somehow makes me feel less alone to have the fixings ready for company. I spent the last couple of hours in the evening varnishing them, but before I got ready for bed, I set one of my potted green grapefruit saplings next to the trellis, as it seemed aesthetically appropriate to me, for some reason, that this should be the plant to grow up my trellis, again assuming I'm going to be here long enough for it to get that tall. I finished all this in the early evening, got the transplanted grapefruit soaking for the night, and started getting ready for bed. Week 29, Day 6. I slept relatively well once again, and headed out to do my chores in the morning. While I was out, though, I thought about how the game theory equation between me and the smugglers hadn't really changed. If anything, I've invited escalation now, because now, not only do they know I'm here, but they also know that I'm evolving, developing new techniques and equipment with each passing month that they leave me here unsupervised. From their perspective, there's no telling what I'll come up with by next month to make their lives harder, or to get myself off this island. The equation hasn't changed. It's still in their best interest to get rid of me, and the simple solution now is to wear earplugs and sunglasses, and to bring bigger guns. I certainly know how to ruin a good time for myself, just as I was starting to relax again. There's really only one solution I can think of, and that's to remove their incentive to keep coming here, though I hate the idea of defacing what might be considered a historical site. With any luck, I'll be picked up and out of here long before then, but if it comes down to it, I'll have to blow it up. And what's more, I want them to see it being blown up. I might even wait until they put their stash in it, just to hurt them enough financially to make them think twice about coming back. If that happens, I'm going to need a better way of detecting them coming, and since I doubt I can build something like radar, I think my best bet would be some kind of hydrophone, to hear their motors from miles away under the ocean, and with a transistor to amplify the signals, I could probably hear them even further away. I could easily make one with piezoelectric crystals again, but I'm out of wire, and metals in general, again, so I figure I'll do another mining week next week. With that, there was really only one major thing left on my laundry list this week, and that was to work on the catamaran, though I could feel myself wanting to put it off. Still, after the high of success I was riding, there was no better week to face my fears than this one. So I went to the mangrove swamp and gave the ship the once-over. Obviously, sitting in stagnant, brackish water for 10 weeks hadn't been kind to it, but thanks to the rubber coating I put on the pontoons, there didn't seem to be any major signs of rotting. The deck and other mechanisms, however, have begun to mold. I groaned and wondered to myself if it was even worth trying to save at this point. Nevertheless, I floated it out of the swamp and around the beach to the front of my base again, where I could at least get some sun to help kill the mold. I started by tearing out the woven Harakeke deck, which was basically unsalvageable at that point, and frankly, I figured I could do better now with bamboo slats. The remaining deck frame was still quite moldy, however, and I thought to myself that it would have helped to have bleach to help kill it. As I racked my brain to try and think of an alternative, I remembered that Nat was always making vinegar-based cleaners at home for cleaning, particularly in the shower. I always hated the smell, but it was probably the best option I had. Probably safer than ammonia, too. But I decided to do a test and wash a small section of moldy decking with ammonia to see what would happen. I washed the rest with concentrated vinegar, figuring that if one failed, the other might do better. Certainly wouldn't hurt to use both, as long as I didn't mix them together. I briefly considered this option, but then remembered that because ammonia is alkaline, it would neutralize with the acidic vinegar, so I held my breath and soaked the whole deck in vinegar, using a brush and sponge, trying to get into all the nooks and crannies, especially the storage cubbies below deck. It was a real pain, and I was reminded of both the adage that the best days of a boat owner's life are when they buy a boat and when they sell it, and again about the sailboat Dad and I tried to fix. At least the catamaran wasn't that bad. In any case, it took me a couple of hours to finish cleaning down the frame, and I left it out in the sun to basically pickle the mold away while I had lunch. I'll have to wait a few days before I can varnish it, and hope the mold doesn't come back. In the meantime, I cut down some bamboo and began splitting it to make new deck slats. I also made a whole bunch more cord and rope, because anything on that boat using rope or cord was rotten by that time. This included most of the joints on the framework, which didn't fill me with confidence, and I suspected I would probably have to replace each of them one at a time. I then used the bamboo I had left to replace the pulley, tiller, and ratchet wheel mechanisms, because I no longer trusted anything on that boat that was made of wood. It took me to the end of the day, a bit annoyed at having to rebuild another thing, though this time destroyed by my own apathy, but I felt like I could finally relax tomorrow. Who knows, maybe this is my opportunity to build it even better than it was before, now that I have better tools and experience building things. Maybe I wouldn't have made it across the ocean in that thing anyway, making the failure of the mast almost certainly God's protection in disguise. You just don't tend to think of setbacks that way. Week 29, Day 7. Another nice, restful Sabbath. I did my morning chores, listened to the radio broadcast in the morning, and transcribed my Bible recordings. After that, I felt the need to get up and move around a little, and decided that, perhaps while technically work, it would be fun to do another survey of the lava tubes on the island, as I didn't get to finish my last survey of all the entrances the first time, because of discovering that the bunker was in regular use, and I didn't actually look and map around inside them yet. I started by taking a walk over to the bunker side of the island, checking the periscope before I went, of course, and continuing my original survey for entrances. It was a nice walk, relaxing now that I knew I didn't have to worry as much about the smugglers, at least for a while. I ended up finding 9 more cave entrances on the east side of the island, though my explorations were hampered a bit at the end by the presence of the mangrove swamp. That area didn't have a lot of cave entrances anyway, and if it did, most of them probably would have been underwater. I returned to base through the garden entrance and had lunch under the awning in the garden, which felt very nice, though the sunshine getting through was a bit of a problem. After lunch, I headed out again to do a more thorough survey of the interiors of the nearby lava tubes. The last cave system I was mining in wasn't actually the closest to my base, specifically the one running directly underneath it. This was because I didn't want to run the risk of causing a cave-in that my own buildings might sink into. Now, however, since my need for metals isn't as pressing, I've been thinking of doing some auxiliary earth moving this week to turn the lava tubes into a secret escape tunnel from my panic room. Of course, this would also create a second entrance to defend or be ambushed from, but I figured I could mitigate this risk if I took the proper precautions. Not like they appear to spend enough time on the island to look for lava tubes anyway. I spent a couple of hours conducting this survey, before returning home and marking the cave system on my map. Naturally, it couldn't be so easy as to run directly under my house. It's about 20 to 30 feet west of any buildings, so if I decide to blast a tunnel through, it's not going to be easy. It's at least a relief, though, to know that none of my buildings will collapse into a sinkhole if I do something wrong. Besides, the lava tubes are deep enough that they should have a pretty strong stone ceiling above them. With a plan in place, I spent the last couple of hours of the day writing in my nature books before going to bed. It's been a while since I could just write in peace, and it feels good. This is the blooper reel. Beginning with some meteorological article. That's hard to say. Cause it's the real thing, they call it cola. Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola. That song's gotta be in the public domain by this time, Coke. You're missing out on a golden marketing opportunity. That end should now forever be at the current. Okay, typo. I know there are always ways to measure I know there are also ways to measure the humidity. I'll light a fire inside the tub to hopefully excuse me. So if I decide to blast a tunnel through, it's not going to be So if I decide to blast a tunnel through, it's not going So if I decide to blast a tunnel through, the other thing I could see that needed doing in there was to tidy up a bit. The only other thing I could see that needed to be done. Why is this small section of text confusing my neural network so much? I'm making too many assumptions about what I need to say next.
It's very bright in here.
While I was in the workshop, I also refilled and reset the electrolysis lig. Making a mess here. My mind doesn't rest for long, however. Should that be doesn't or doesn't? Hold on. Doesn't? What's a doesn't? Doesn't. I spent the last couple of from their perspective, there's no telling. Hold on, that's a typo. I breathed a big sigh of relief and started laughing. A little at first, before devolving into hysterics. I breathed a big sigh of relief and started laughing, a little at first, before devolving into hysterics. However, I soon had to stifle it. So I held my breath. The equation hasn't changed. it's still in there. The equipment, it was a real pain, and I was reminded of both the adage that the best days of a bono's. The typo has been untyped. You may resume. And I didn't actually look and I didn't actually look and map and I didn't actually look at after lunch. After lunch, I headed out. I've been thinking of doing some auxiliary earth moving this week. Some auxiliary earthworm. I need to turn autocorrect off in my brain. I hate it when I'm texting, and I hate it when it happens when my brain is reading too. I can't trust that neural network. Slow down. Hey there. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. I feel like I can finally relax. I can't though, because the smugglers will be back soon enough, and I've already got some ideas for how to deal with them next time. So, if you want to see what I make next, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified as soon as they're ready. Now, although I've got the radio up and running again, it would still help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it, since every view increases my chances of someone seeing it who can help me get out of here. And since you apparently enjoyed it enough to watch it this long, you can press the like button to tell us so. Also, if you want to chat about your own stories and perspectives on the episode, maybe about something big and scary that you made it to the other side of and was able to breathe again once it was finished, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I'd love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.